All right, folks. Thanks everybody for joining in this morning. And so first, before we jump into all we have, do want to take a moment to do some introductions this morning. I know we do have some new folks joining in with us, so want to go around, just make sure everybody have opportunity to introduce themselves from the Affordable Housing Coalition as a whole. I'm excited about the staffing up on the city side. I know Marla and Mel and others, y'all have been grueling and working so hard, and so glad to see folks joining in and filling out the team. I'm Durham Montgomery, Chair, Affordable Housing Coalition. Grateful to serve. Former City Council member, worked in and continue to be one who works in advocating on the housing side. Worked at, served and led Bethesda Center here in the city prior to going and joining Cancer Society doing government relation works now. On my screen, I'm just going to flow through. I got Paul up next and then Joe after Paul.
Good morning. I'm Paula McCoy. I'm the director of the Partnership for Prosperity. Glad to be here this morning.
Good morning. I am Joe Crocker. I am a retiree from the Kate B. Reynolds Charitable Trust, now 3 years, a philanthropic organization here in town. For those that may be new to the area, I'm not sure who I'm introducing to, but original member of the coalition and been an advocate for affordable housing since I've been in Winston-Salem. So happy to be here and happy you all are here.
All right, then Paul and then John.
Okay, good morning. I'm Paul Norby, and I am a retiree from City County Planning. I was the director of the planning department there for 19 years before retiring 4 years ago. And so I was appointed by the council to the Affordable Housing Coalition. Of course, we worked on housing issues along with Marlo before I retired. So glad to be here.
Good morning, everybody. John Louder. I'm the president of the Triad Real Estate and Building Industry Coalition. Used to be the executive director of the Piedmont Triad Apartment Association when I was appointed to the coalition. Resident of Winston-Salem, obviously, and happy to be here.
Great. Doug, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Doug Moore. I have recently moved here. I'm the housing program manager for the city of Winston-Salem. Recently moved here from Oklahoma. Been a planner for over 25 years now. Started my career in Fort Collins, Colorado, but I've worked in Colorado, Wyoming, Oklahoma, helped out with work in Louisiana, Kansas, and also Missouri with that. So we had kind of a broad range of experience across there, but I'm really excited to be a part of this group, to work with all of you, and really excited about further down on our agenda when we start to talk about working with Housing NOLA and the 10-year plan. So thank you. Nice to meet all of you.
Great. Welcome, Doug. Welcome. And for, I'm not sure if those who were able to attend the meeting, Doug was at the council meeting, so I got a brief opportunity to be there. And so again, excited to have you working and helping us as we navigate on this big task of helping lead the council and the city in this work. Marla, did you have something?
I was going to just say, in spite of the fact that Doug has spent time in Louisiana, Kansas, and Missouri, I promise we never crossed paths. We just happen to have been in some of the same places over the years. So it's kind of interesting. So we've been able to share notes about, oh, remember this place and remember this event, So anyway, but no, we never crossed paths. So it's interesting to have someone in here who's been places I've been as well.
And also we've been able to share good restaurants in Baton Rouge, so which is probably more important.
Well, I have to hit you all up on that next time I go that way. Get good directions on some food. All right, with that, we'll move down to our discussion items, and I think Marla and team has this properly titled as a moment of celebration in terms of council approving of the Housing NOLA technical assistance proposal. So one, give a round of applause to staff and their efforts on continuing to navigate this, as well as for those who attended the council meetings and committee meetings. there should be an extra round of applause probably for some of the dialogue and conversation initially, but did get it over the hump and full approval from the council on that. So excited for us as we move down that direction. And so with that, I will.
Congratulations, Marla. Yeah. And staff. Good work.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. We're excited. Oh my gosh. I can't
Yeah, this has been a good time.
Yeah. So, it just feels like we're on the cusp of something very major for this community. So thank you. And thank you guys for coming out, because I think that really made the difference. The council hearing your voices and why this was important to you. So I think without you, I don't know that staff could have done this alone. So thank you all. And that's why I said it's cause for celebration for all of us. Thank you.
Good job.
Yeah. So with that, I guess I'll kick it over either to you, Marla, or Doug, whoever will kind of just walk us through just the process, the next step implementation of the technical assistance plan.
Sure. So, of course, we've already started working with the city attorney's office to develop the contract that will need to be executed with Housing NOLA. And so we're hoping to have the draft out to them sometime next week, by the end of next week at the latest, with the hope that we might be able to get the work underway starting October 1, which would be very helpful because, if you'll recall in the proposal and the plan outline, it had quarterly activities that were going to take place. And so being able to start at the actual beginning of a calendar quarter would be really helpful if we can do it. So that's the goal line we're shooting for, is to get the contract in place and then be able to gear up. Certainly by the time we meet again, we'll know where we are. We should know sooner, but really have conversation in earnest about initiating kickoff. So just keep in mind the goal that we're trying to move towards is October 1. And so any thoughts, feedback, concerns about that as the target date?
Marla, were there any restrictions or contingencies put on the approval? Obviously, I missed the meeting kind of thing, haven't read what was actually approved, but did they have any concerns expressed, or did we have to agree to something as we move forward?
No, they approved the 18-month engagement, which is great.
Right.
And so, that was it. And so now we're just, the big thing is in developing the contract, we want to make sure we build in some benchmarks and deliverables and things of that nature, because we kind of have that 50,000-foot plan in the proposal. And so I think we really want to kind of unpack some of that and have some specifics that they know they need to tell us about each quarter. And so Doug and I have started that process of looking at what some of those potential benchmarks can be. And certainly I think that we can send it to you all for some initial feedback to see if there's anything in particular you might want to have called out as a benchmark. But we're like I said, we're in the beginning stages of trying to get the contract in order.
Okay.
So the next two things really are questions that staff has. The first being, what do you all as a coalition, how do you see yourselves now supporting, being a part of, even facilitating the overarching movement of the process, as well as if there's another date in mind for actual project kickoff or some kind of initial planning. So while staff is hoping that the contract can show an effective start date of October 1, when would you all might want to look at some kind of formal opportunity to come together with that simple focus on kicking off the activities of the planning process? And then obviously, part and parcel of that is, the functioning of the coalition vis-a-vis the activity of Housing NOLA. So that's why it mentions about, you know, aligning work groups that we might have aligning. Now I know we have our groups that were established when the coalition was established. And so one of the questions would be, you know, how you want to activate those groups in particular, and whether there might be any other working groups that might be important or useful to support this planning process. So that's just kind of some stuff to kind of discuss and see what you think might make sense.
Thoughts? I know that I know some of our past conversation, one of the things that we did say is that we wanted to wait to see what happens from the Housing NOLA plan, and then we would want to align our working groups work with whatever was coming forward and out of the Housing NOLA plan. And so just from a consensus, if we still feel that way, you know, I think that's a good way for us to move forward, unless folks' positions have changed. I think it makes sense for us to do that. Are folks still comfortable with that?
Yeah, I'm wondering if when you're putting together the game plan that'll go in the contract, what kind of deliverables and dates and process, you know, whether that might inform us as to how we want to structure ourselves to kind of follow closely with that. I mean, that I don't know whether how they're going to be structured is going to structure according to our working groups, or whether we should structure ourselves according to how they're going. But I would think it would be important for members of the coalition to kind of be there at their public meetings, certainly, and then maybe in our monthly meetings we have a little update and catch up with them as to how it's, or you, Marla, as to where things are. But I think it'll be important for us to kind of track really closely where they're going with their process and be present for it as much as we can.
Yes, I think it's a both and. You know, I think that that our existing groups certainly make sense, and it might be how we take those groups and see where along that continuum of 18 months those groups might function. But I'm also wondering if maybe the function of some of the groups might be enlarged a little to kind of take on some other particular aspects of the plan. It's either maybe a couple of the groups expand some of their scope, or we kind of do another small working group to address some things. So for instance, two things that readily come to mind. One is the data work, and where does that best reside in our working groups? But then another big piece is going to be that engagement and that outreach, right? Because that's a huge part of it. And we don't necessarily have a working group that has a lot of that as its focus. But I think, you know, they being Housing NOLA, will need a lot of assistance with knowing who to touch, who to invite, you know, who to engage with. And so that's one area where I think you all would be a tremendous resource, more so than staff, right? Because you're in community in a different way than we are. So I think, and it may be that we kind of put together maybe a list of some of those primary areas where you will definitely be value added, or even, you know, the main one to kind of help facilitate some things happening, to make it easier for Housing NOLA to do what they do, you know, making those connections.
So Marla, to Paul's point, how many working groups, has it already been determined in the proposal how many working groups were needed? I have to admit, I haven't gone back and refreshed myself with the proposal, but I didn't know how many working groups and whether those two you just named, the data and the, the engagement pieces, are those intended to be separate working groups, or how will the working groups be structured? Because I want to make sure that we take advantage of this opportunity. 18 months will go by faster than we all, think it will. And if we're not intentional about getting the best, forgive the way this sounds, but the best possible people and contacts for Housing NOLA to do their work in the most efficient time, then we're going to be wasting a lot of time and then probably looking at extensions and that kind of thing. I don't want to give city council any reasons to regret, what they did, and for anybody to say, I told you so kind of thing. So I think we need to make sure we take advantage of this the best way we can. So the initial structure needs to be pretty tight to begin with.
Agreed. So I'm sorry, go ahead, Paula.
No, I would just want to interject, and I asked that question about the press release or public notice, in terms of letting the public know, that we are in action.
Yes, we can. I was reticent to do anything until we've had some time to talk and make sure we had the contract stuff underway, because my thinking, and certainly, I defer to you all. My thinking is when we're ready to kick it off is when we do the press release, right? So that immediately on the heels of that, the outreach begins. So we start to touch people and schedule the stakeholder meetings and working on the summit and all of those things. So the thinking is, if we do the press release when we're actually ready to start implementation, might work better for us, because I don't want there to be a gap. Like they hear something, then they don't hear anything for a while, and then they start to question what we're doing.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yep.
And to Joe's question about the group, so we've got our 4 existing groups, and I'll need to go back and review some of the working group notes and just even the functions of the working groups to see if any of those 2 examples I gave, if they could reside in either of those groups. And then if there's not a clean place for them to reside, then, that might be called for creating, just temporarily, during the planning process, some additional working groups to kind of facilitate the process. So I think we can do some additional analysis and see what makes sense.
Yeah, working groups might also kind of evolve as we're getting into this, and it may be good to have a little more of an opening for that evolution to occur.
Yep, makes sense. And I'll add just to the place, or even throw out there to folks around this conversation of target date and kickoff. Since the approval of the council, just in conversation with others and other groups and folks that are meeting and having conversation, there is some level of ambiguity around exactly what this is, even though I think we're clear on what we're doing and where we are, particularly from some quote unquote housing advocates out there. And I would wonder if it would make sense prior to the actual kickoff of the work that Housing NOLA does, for us to have some kind of public event that invites the advocates to it, to just re-explain what we're getting ready to do, kind of like a pre-kickoff, so that at the actual kickoff, you're not having those folks bombard them with questions on what we're doing, but it's more of a, hey, these folks are invited. Hey, we want to do some pre-stuff. This is what we're doing. This is what we're going to do. This is the time for kickoff. Have questions about how we want to implement, how we're going to start this. And some of that could potentially be funneled over to Housing NOLA as they start to frame kind of their engagement. But just, I want to try our best to manage some of the potential pressures out there prior to them coming. And I know, Paula, you said at some of these additional tables out there as well with some of the housing groups, and I know there may be questions there, but just wondering if folks even find value in that. But I think there could be, but just wanted to throw that out there.
I think that's a great idea. Yeah.
Yeah. Do we know Derwin, who some of those groups are that needs more education? I mean, actually, if you could, well, I don't know if you saw the finance committee meeting, but even some of the council people didn't know what this was, to be quite honest with you. So they're not just housing folks, but you know, for them to call it a study again, like we were going to be doing, you know, embarking upon some discovery and research kind of thing, and as opposed to actually putting an implementation plan in place. So it's not just other housing groups and advocates, but there are some other people that don't quite know as well.
Yeah. I was thinking folks like Folks for Good Housing is one of those groups that's out there that's been doing some work in assembling tables. There's Housing Justice Now is another group that's been out there doing some work. I was having a conversation just the other day with one of the, a local nonprofit executive director, and they use the same term that you did, Joe. They said housing, hit the housing. I said, no, it's not just not another study. It's not just
right. So, yeah, so that perception is out there about a study kind of thing. So I don't know if the press release, I think we can probably gain some of that knowledge, and we don't probably want to wait until this, but to Paula's question about the press release, I think that needs to be really clear about what this is and what this is not possibly. So I don't know if the city staff puts that together, their marketing, who puts the press release together kind of thing, but I think that would be a key communication piece to help us answer some of those questions without them being asked.
So part of our contract will be with what they have from their proposal is working with us with the marketing and all. And everything that you're bringing up is very important. And I think that we need to kind of touch base with the marketing group from Housing NOLA to get some suggestions on how they've done it in the past, how they've marketed in the past. Because you're right, we want our kickoff event to be a huge, successful, invigorating event, but we need to get the word out so that all of this clarification is on top of that. So we'll work with them to figure that out and make sure that we market. But I need to come back to you guys because you're going to be the experts on where we need to hit. It's going to be on kind of what staff can do to know those individual groups. As Marla said earlier, we'll figure out what marketing plan. We'll definitely run it by all of you first, but then have you on board to help us get that introductory word out. I always like to say, I refer to maybe doing little brown bags with some of these different, meaning you do little lunch get-togethers or things like that to get the word out. I don't know as though that's the right approach with this project yet. It might be, in ways, but we want to make sure that we're engaging people early on in very different ways. And that's the specialty. That's one reason why we're contracting with these folks, is they know how to do this in very unique ways that are really going to help us hit the people that we need to hit. And all. So give us a chance to talk with them.
On the press release front, certainly we can work with the city's marketing department to put that together, and obviously that'll get circulated amongst you as well. And so, but it will come back to the question, in terms of timing, what are you most comfortable with from a timing perspective in terms of when you want it to go out, and then we can get started with marketing to put that information together with your target date in mind.
So Doran, to your question about these groups, then Doran, when do you think those groups need to be addressed? Are you thinking something before the press release or before the kickoff, or is it, so at the press? And I'm not. Also, are you thinking at the kickoff event? That's when these questions might come up, which would precipitate us doing something. If we're going to prevent that, obviously you got to do it before the kickoff event. So you're talking about doing something well before the kickoff event to make sure that more people than not know what this is and what we're intending to do.
Yeah.
And who gets invited to that? I mean, is that an open invitation, or is that sent to these specific people that you just named, or how do you build the audience for that?
I don't know, quite frankly. I think one is naming the ones that we know, inviting those folks, and in particular, some of those groups, once you invite them, they start inviting
other people.
Yeah. And then do we inadvertently have a launch? You know what I mean?
Yeah, right,
You know,
right.
because,
That's yeah.
because the other thing
yeah.
too is we might have some people in mind, like you were mentioned, but then what if we inadvertently miss somebody? And then we don't want to start it with, oh, you asked them, but not us. And so, I know we kind of have to walk through this carefully.
And maybe it's more, maybe to Doug's point, maybe it is more the brown bag. Maybe it is more that going directly to those groups and saying, hey, if you have a meeting or something already scheduled, can we get a few minutes on your schedule just to explain what we're getting ready to do and make sure you're aware, and there's an invite coming to the actual kickoff. And even if you have thoughts and ideas about it, we want to hear from you, kind of thing, so that people feel included as they're coming to it, and that we don't kind of get into that stumble over those pitfalls before we need to. So that may be a better way to do it.
Let me ask this. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna, since I brought it up, I was gonna offer myself as I'm happy to, if folks are, we can list out some groups or individuals. I'm happy to kind of reach out and try to get on their schedule, kind of be one to talk to them if that's helpful, so that in preparation to that.
Darren, I have about 10 groups names I can give you.
Paul.
Yeah, I think he was talking to you anyway, Paula.
Let me ask this. I totally agree that the advocacy groups who might have the most questions about what this is need to be reached out to in advance to this. Let me ask the question about organizations and even private developers who are already involved in providing housing. Would the appropriate time for them to get involved would be at the kickoff event itself?
I think so. And then at some of those tables, some of them are at some of those other tables too, as well. Yeah.
And I think what has occurred to me is, I'm glad Paula says she already has about 10 names, that we actually start that master list, because we will need it, across the board to provide to Housing NOLA so that they can do their regular invites to stakeholder meetings, the summit, and so forth. So, what I would say is, while we'll give information to Derwin, if you could also start sending that to Doug, and we can start compiling that master list, because we'll need to hand that over or share that with Housing NOLA anyway. And we can figure out, certainly on the list, if we could identify, what sector they might represent, that'll be helpful, so that if there need to be any targeted meetings to just developers or just advocates or resident groups or nonprofit organizations, we can already have that sort, and know who to target for any of those very direct meetings. But we can start to gather the intel to be able to put that in the Housing NOLA's hands.
Cool. Could I ask one more question? And maybe it goes without saying that during the duration of this contract with them, we've been talking about having working groups and us being plugged in, to the things that they do. And it could be that some of us are going to be involved in some things and some of us are going to be involved in other things. I think it'd be real important for the coalition as a whole to have a good feel for where we are in the process as we're going. So can this be a kind of a standing agenda item at each of our monthly meetings to kind of, what's the status of the contract? Where are things going? What have been some accomplishments, challenges? How's it going, kind of thing. So we kind of get the whole picture, in case some of us are involved in some things, but not others.
Makes sense.
I might add that even after this project is done, I think you're going to want it to be as a standing item to see the success and where we are at achieving long-term goals.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, because we're putting together the strategy, then you've got the implementation piece, and I don't know if Housing NOLA is going to recommend, we do a process similar to what they do with the annual report cards, right? But we would have to find a group, at some point who's going to own the monitoring and tracking and the accountability part for implementation, So this will continue on. The question will become over time, which roles does the coalition hold versus, who in the community serves in a similar role as Housing NOLA does in New Orleans, so those are some things that we'll have to decide. But oh yeah, we'll be talking about this for years to come if everything goes as we plan.
Yeah. So one thing, just me on date wise, I don't have a specific on the actual kickoff date. I don't have a particular thought on it outside of using as much of whatever warm time we have left to get the most people out if it's in public. So we're looking at October. We still, beginning of November is still, pretty manageable. But when you start moving in, just, note that weather will impact people's desire to come and be and engage. And so that's the only thing I'll put out there on that.
Yeah, over the years, public process is always difficult once you get into November, December, January. After that, of course, you got to watch for Valentine's Day, but you're usually fine until you get towards graduation and all with it. So,
one of the things, I appreciate that, Doug and Derwin, thinking about the date and time. I wonder if we're thinking about, and I don't know, maybe we're not, I haven't heard it expressed that we're thinking about how linear this process will be. In other words, if you're going to start the contract October 1st and, you have to wait until that starts before we do the kickoff, or do we do the kickoff before that? Or because I'm thinking that if we can take advantage of Housing NOLA's expertise, back to Doug's point, I don't know whether they have, and Marla, you might be able to answer this better than anybody else, having worked with Andronika. Do they have a process or a method of coming into and this might be the first one they've done, I don't know, but coming into a community and understanding that community a little bit, if there's a person, whether it's Andronika or one of her chief lieutenants that's going to be working with her, to kind of understand the lay of the land in Winston-Salem, and maybe talk to people like Paula and other housing advocates to kind of find out before we start, finalizing some of these things and making sure, not that they drive the process. We need to always be in control of the process as much as we can, since we're the employer in this situation with this. But do we take advantage of their expertise in doing some of this in order to plan some of these things we're talking about?
Another both and. The way it kicked off in New Orleans was different because that's where they were based, right?
Right, exactly.
So I know there will be some of that time to kind of get the lay of the land. And as I was looking at the kind of game plan from their different quarters, in that very first quarter, there's listed both what we call like a listening tour or a community roundtable. So you just kind of start to hear from folks what's going on, as well as some stakeholder meeting, right? And so I think that'll be part of that info gathering. That's not to say that there's not going to be just some independent trip or two to just come and just listen. Maybe talk to us in more depth.
I would think that would be that would probably happen. And I want to make sure that I had a question. Does the city's 18-month clock for their management start the day of the contract? If we start October 1st, that's when the 18 months clock start ticking, correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
So part of this is what do we want to try to do before the formal kickoff, right?
Right.
Versus, afterwards. So, and I mean, while staff was thinking October 1, just because of the quarter setup, I mean, we can make it later if that's what you need.
No,
in order to
I'm
do
not.
the pre-work.
I'm the worst at these kinds of things. Believe me. As far as this kind of planning kind of goes, all I'll say is that whatever we do needs to make sense. That's about the only guidance I can give.
Right. And now that I think about it, we could have the kickoff, but then there can still be some stuff happening on parallel tracks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would think it would have to be.
Right. And so it could be that we do the formal kickoff on the 1st of October, just for discussion purposes. There's some preliminary stuff that Housing NOLA may be doing to gear up while we're doing those, like lunch and learns, or we are an item on groups, their meeting agendas to say, hey, this is coming. So I think we can probably still talk about what's going to make the most sense. And I would expect that once we send a draft of the contract to Housing NOLA, we'll have a couple of conversations, and probably some of you might want to be at the table for some of those conversations as we clarify some of the benchmarks and deliverables, right? And then we can touch on some of these other questions as well, so that we're all on the same page when we start off.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I was just going to throw out there, and part of it I think you touched on was, and Doug may have mentioned too, is maybe getting a sense for us to be able to have a sense from Housing NOLA on their kickoffs. What do they want to do, or what do they desire to have be done at that actual kickoff? Because if it's just kind of an introduction to the work, this is what we're going to do, or do they actually want to have schedules and things they want to lay out to them? Because if not, I could say, let's just try to, if it's just an introduction to the work, then maybe that, firm kind of October 1, if we can do work now on this side to help prepare it and get it out there, then that may make sense. But if they're looking to be kind of more in-depth work at that time frame, then it may mean something a little bit different. So I think that at least that'd be helpful for me to understand, what is the desired outcomes from that kickoff.
Well, and that's a very good point. I know I worked with a group once, Blue Zones, and they had a big kick out of it, and they had very specific requirements. They wanted high top tables in a certain location, wine and cheese, and all those things. Now, I don't think we're talking about wine and cheese for our event, but Housing NOLA may like things and really have this figured out. So you're right, we're going to have to find out what that is. So,
yeah, okay. Here we get that feedback. Then, and in the meantime, I think it would be worthwhile if that's feedback we get here sooner than maybe some email communication. In the meantime, because if it's something that says, hey, we can move a little bit quicker on, then we may want to kind of maybe make a suggestion on timing at before our next meeting, since the next meeting will be buttoned up into October. So, yeah, work for everybody.
Yep.
Cool. Next up on our agenda is CLC assessment and report. I will just, as a quick note, I don't know, I may have to kick it to you, Marla, because I will have to drop off here at 10:45, and if you still meet, I'll jump back in because there's a short call I have to jump on. But the CLC assessment report was sent over to us. You have the attachment of that, and Marla had briefed us earlier this year when this was kicking off and starting, and that this process was going on. And so this preliminary assessment, Marla.
Could we maybe just, unless you think we need more time to talk about the future meetings, because, we can provide you with the final full report when it's ready. We were just meeting with the consultant yesterday to go over final edits, but we just wanted you to know that it was basically complete and that the full report is forthcoming quickly. And so, it may be that we can kind of wrap up our whole agenda in just a few minutes if we could maybe handle that one potential business, which is the meetings.
Yep, you're right. So I'm fine with that. So one thing we need to do, next meeting, we will need to have in person. And in that meeting, we will need to take a vote and decide on how we will want to conduct our meetings into the future. Marla also attached a copy of a resolution from one of the other boards commissions in terms of how they have conducted their work and business in terms of virtual. I know we talked before. I think we get pretty good attendance in our virtual meetings, but we'll need to have our next one in person, and then we need to make a decision about future affordable housing coalition meetings. But the meeting where we vote has to be in person on that. So I want to throw it out there, thoughts, discussion, but do know when we make it, we have to vote in person on that.
And that'll be our September meeting that we'll all come together in person, and that will be one of our primary agenda items. And one of the things that occurred to me, and I'll get clarity on it, is whether you can do, both, depending on, and because I didn't remember seeing that, but I said I'll get clarity on that in time for that meeting in September.
So we can decide that in September?
We'll decide in September.
Okay. And is that meeting the 23rd?
I don't have my calendar in front of me, but it's the fourth Friday. Mm-hmm.
That's the 23rd. Okay.
Yes, that'll be it.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Marla, I don't know, even when we're planning, I don't know, maybe some of the housing, our actual work, maybe some of our meetings, this is something just for us to think about later. We talk about in September, but our actual official meetings, some of those may potentially could be tied into some of the actual work that they're doing out in, kind of public in terms of if it's an in-person one. I think there are probably some creative ways for us to think about that, but just for us to think about, and like I said, we can think about it on the 23rd to discuss in more detail. Cool.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
All right. With that, I know the bottom agenda, Marla's have a few other updates there for us. Again, I'm glad to see staffing up on that side, additional folks coming on, choice neighborhood updates, as well as the housing condition assessment. You want to speak anything on those two, the choice neighborhood and housing condition?
So kind of building on some work that Paul and I were involved in a couple of years ago with For Everyone Home, we're doing a housing conditions assessment. Again, we've talked before about anecdotal evidence of a need for more housing preservation, but just what is the extent of the need? So we're starting an assessment in the Northeast Ward, and we'll do the entire ward, and it'll look at roofs, gutters, doors, siding, a lot of the exterior functions. None of this is interior. This is all from the street or the sidewalk, just to kind of get a general sense of what we're looking at. And then depending on the value council finds in that, we'll be asking whether they want to expand and do the whole city, so that we can know really what we're needing to do. And that could potentially also inform any other decisions around bond dollars and what have you, a bond initiative of sorts or anything of that nature. But what do we need to do to preserve the existing housing stock that we have? As far as choice,
I'm getting ready to. Well, no, you go ahead. You're on mute, Paul.
Oh, you're on mute.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I'm really, happy about that housing condition assessment. I'm still concerned though about the internal condition of the houses, and just wondering how you might, include that as part of the assessment.
I think that we would probably need to partner with neighborhood associations, because that's going to be a voluntary thing, right? Folks sharing what's going on inside their four walls. But from a city perspective, we can't ask and we can't enter unless there's a code complaint. And most of the times when we have housing code complaints, they are tenants who have an issue with the landlord not making a repair. So we'd have a limited universe even when we could get in. So I think that this might be an opportunity. And, now that I think about it, as we're going through this process with Housing NOLA and we're doing this engagement with community, this could be something that could be shared with them, and we could ask them to share that with their neighbors and collect that information for us. Or it can even be a project for the neighborhood. And then they can kind of compile the information. We might need to do a little training, and again, an opportunity for capacity building, right? To see, okay, once we find out what the situation is, then what, right? Because we have the rehab loans available. Some people apply, some don't. Some who may want to apply for whatever reason may not be eligible. So we've got to kind of figure out, all right, now, once we get this data, what do we do with it? But I think that first and foremost, partnering with the neighborhood associations or those active folks in the neighborhood who may not have an association yet, but still want to get to this info, how do we partner with them? But because we developed that survey. So when we were doing For Everyone Home, just for everyone else to know, we actually created an internal survey to assess conditions, looking at electrical, plumbing, heating, and some other areas, the flooring and what have you. So it's just a matter of figuring out the best strategy to get it to the community, get the data back, and then figure out, okay, writ large, what does it tell us? And what is our response? Mm-hmm.
I like that strategy, Marla, of partnering with the community, because, the external is one thing, but once you get inside those houses, it's a total different picture. Mm-hmm. So I certainly hope that we can make that happen.
Yeah, and let's think about how we can fold it into this whole process with Housing NOLA, because that might be a great opportunity to touch more people quickly.
I think that's going to be a big challenge, because I think you're going to always have to rely on people voluntarily doing that, which then means you're not going to have consistent information there. I mean, obviously, for people who choose to participate, that'll give us more information, but we may not have a complete idea of housing conditions in an area unless we had 100% survey, which under our current laws can't really happen. So encouraging, certainly finding incentives and encouraging would be good, but I don't know that we're going to get anywhere near 100% or even 90% with people being able to opt into not doing it.
Let's see. What I'm pulling up is actual. Let me share my screen if I can and let you see what the survey looks like. This is kind of like the draft of it that we had put together. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can see it.
Right. So it was a real straightforward, and it's totally voluntary if you fill it out. So this is the individual resident just fills that out and turns it in. Totally voluntary, but at least, it can give us an idea of, do we need more money to put into our rehab program? But it just kind of helps us understand what's out here. That's the main deal. Just what are we dealing with in the community? So.
And just to let you know, we have this survey going on in the Castle Heights community. They have a housing committee, and we have provided them with this survey. And so the neighborhood association has a steering committee, and a housing committee is working on this survey right now.
I'd be curious to hear, what they think about it, what they do with the information once they compile it, So that would be curious for us to know, because it's almost like they'd be our pilot project, really, to see how useful it is to a neighborhood, and again with Castle Heights, they're an organized neighborhood, right? They've got a neighborhood association, so there may be already some capacity to then say, all right, what do we do about it, right?
Who receives this survey, Paula and Marla? And then is there going to be some I guess, amalgamation of the data from it, or is it just to be for specific households because there's no like individual address, or there's no individual, there's no way to tie the survey back to an individual residence, if you would, if they're having these issues. So is this meant to indicate that a broad effort needs to take place because the data indicates that a majority of the surveys say that they're having, whether it's issues with pipes or, paint or, kitchen floors, whatever it is, how is it to be used, I guess is my question. Because I wasn't aware of any of this, to be honest.
Yeah, I can find out. I can find out, Joe, if they are putting addresses with the, the survey. I'm not sure, but, and Marla, they may invite you to a meeting, their housing committee meeting. But yeah, they are in the process of this now, Joe. Yeah. And so I'll learn more about it in their next meeting.
Yeah, the last thing I want is for, to get a bunch of data and then don't do anything with it. I mean, that's exactly what some of the council people were concerned about, in the proposal that we were trying to get approved, kind of thing. So I just want to make sure that we do something with what we get.
They are working with CSAM. CSAM has been analyzing some of the data that they've been collecting. Okay. So I think CSAM will be engaged in this in terms of analyzing the data.
Okay.
It's interesting, that survey that you put up there, Marla, is kind of if you had target areas where you're trying to market the rehab program, that'd be an excellent tool to market the rehab program, because people take a look at it and kind of may not have been thinking about some things before, but as they go through that checklist, they say, oh yeah, well, yeah, I could use some help in doing this. Yeah.
And the interesting thing about this neighborhood is that 80% of the houses are home-owned. And so 80% home ownership. They want to maintain the home ownership there. And during their initial survey, the renters there want to become homeowners in that neyborhood. So yeah, so sustaining this neighborhood is one of their priorities.
Okay.
Okay, and pardon me, there's noise in the background. Choice Neighborhoods, just wanted you all to know that demolition and site prep is underway at the former Brown Elementary School site, which is phase 1. So that's near Shiloh Baptist Church, near 11th Street. So if you happen to be through the area, you'll see the activity underway. The formal groundbreaking, they're hoping to have that around the end of September, maybe late September, early October. They're still waiting to close the loan on the project, which they're shooting for probably late September. So stay tuned, and maybe by the time we meet on the 23rd, we'll have a better sense of when closing will take place and when the formal groundbreaking. But just, to let you know that work is proceeding with the project, relocation of some of the residents from the current Cleveland Avenue home site has begun. So just knowing that work is underway with Choice Neighborhoods and the transformation of Cleveland Avenue homes, public housing development.
Marla, is that mixed income housing or just senior housing?
No, it's mixed income. The senior housing is either phase 3 or phase 4. But the first 2 phases are totally mixed income. And all of it will be mixed, except it's just that one phase will be dedicated to seniors, but all of it will be mixed income.
Marla, thank you for that update. On Choice Neighborhoods, and I haven't kept up with it since they got the success they did, but I was surprised that a number of the council members on the finance committee kind of used the Choice Neighborhood development and effort as their answer to affordable housing in Winston-Salem. I mean, there were a number, if you remember, and Paul, of course you were there, but there were a number of those committee members that kind of reference back to, well, what else is the city supposed to be doing since we're doing the Choice Neighborhoods? I mean, and all of our money or a lot of our money is going to that development. It's almost like that's the answer to affordable housing, which again tells me that there needs to be a broader education about what the real affordable housing needs in Winston-Salem, are. And that just surprised me. I just had to say that kind of thing because I was just surprised to hear that term used a couple of times in reference to our proposal in the finance committee. I don't know if it came up much in the council meeting on that Monday, but that finance committee meeting, surely it had a number of references to choice neighborhoods and the city doing that and that effort kind of being their contribution to affordable housing, if you would, if I could put it that way.
And to Joe's point, early on, we talked about defining affordable housing. And I'm wondering if in the housing NOLA proposal, will we address some of that in terms of defining affordable housing? Because you're right, Joe, people just don't know.
They don't know
what affordable housing is. They think it's Section 8 only.
Only, exactly. It's so stereotypical kind of thing. That's anyway, I couldn't help but notice that. Just kind of bothered me a little bit.
Paul, are you speaking to us?
I'm sorry, I started talking without even unmuting, but I think somebody in the finance committee even made the point that the choice neighborhoods wasn't even going to be a one-to-one replacement for the housing.
Right, exactly.
So
exactly.
So it really wasn't moving us closer to the goal. But now I do have a question related to that, because they were talking about there's being a big dollar gap between the funds that HUD gave for choice neighborhoods and what's needed to do the plan. And council was going to have a special meeting, was it this week or next week, to try to figure out how to help close that gap? Do you know anything more on that, Marla?
There was a meeting last week to look at the gap. And the thing that I need to clarify is the gap was for the entire project, not what's needed necessarily for phase 1 to get going and potentially even phase 2. So the huge gap was for all 5 phases. My guess, and certainly my hope, is that the amount of the gap will decrease over time, because pricing in general will come down, for materials and supplies and so forth. We know everything is just much more expensive right now, but we're starting to see in some sectors, even with some food items now, pricing is starting to come back down. So, while the gap may be 40-something million today, my guess is that it won't be, or shouldn't be, nearly that much in 3 years. So we pretty much have the funding in place for the first 2 rounds of construction, and there are a total of 5 phases. So I know the concern is, well, what do we do to make sure everything gets funded? But I'm not sure that we could legitimately solve that today, because it's still a few years off, because if, the thing would be, we would identify the money and then maybe set it aside. I'm not sure, what the ultimate thinking is of council in terms of how they want to respond. But my hope is that the need that is on paper today will not be the need in 3 years, because we'll be in a different market, in a different climate.
So Marla, there's a perception that the 20 or 30 million that the city has for housing, affordable housing, I guess, is earmarked for the choice neighborhoods.
No.
Now, is that right? I'm glad you said that, because there is that dialogue, that conversation going on about that.
No, because the thing is, and many council members have been very clear as it relates to the developer of choice and so forth, we have other needs in Winston-Salem. And we had these needs before we got the choice grant. And we are committed to meeting and addressing the needs that we had before this opportunity came along, right? So no, the plan is to dedicate that ARPA money to the broader affordable housing needs. So council is looking and staff is looking for other resources to bring to the table to help that gap a little bit more. You know, council approved just shy of $9 million back in April to help with the gap. So council's looking for other resources, but I don't believe it's anybody's expectation that the ARPA money is going to do that, because, you know, this is once in a lifetime money with ARPA. And so this is our opportunity to address our broader needs rather than a very specific project that has its own source of funds. The developers have a responsibility to find the funds to do the project. It's not necessarily a situation for the city alone to solve.
And Marla, I don't want to, I've missed a lot of that, but at least one, I don't know if it was already stated, but I do know that there is a request to the federal level for additional resources. I don't know if you already said that.
No, I didn't mention that. So in addition to that, a couple of weeks ago, the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency provided an additional $5 million to the project to help. At the federal level, there has been legislation moving that would help projects that were awarded choice grants in 2019, 2020, and 21. We got ours in 20, because all three of those years, you know, are at the point where they're ready to break ground and do what they need to do, and then are hit with the price escalation. And this year's awards, so traditionally a choice grant is $30 million. This year's grantees receive $50 million. So there is that immediate recognition that the market is different. Something has to be done. I think one chamber of Congress has approved the legislation that would provide additional funding to those projects over that period of time. Now, we were a little surprised to learn that it was a competitive application for those funds, because if you came through that time, your costs are your costs, right? But I understand that the Winston project is very well situated to probably be successful with an application once we're able to submit one. So, like I said, we see other resources coming into the mix. So, you know, how much the city will ultimately have to kick in additionally or over and above the nearly 15 million that we've got in, or we've got committed. And all of it's not in yet, but we've committed. That's to be seen.
Marla, I understand that Charlotte List has done an outstanding job in leveraging resources and raising money. I think they've raised over 100 million for housing. But are we talking to them? I know Housing NOLA has done an outstanding job too, but Charlotte is a little bit closer. Are we talking to them about their, you know, in any of their way that they're doing their housing?
The mayor has been in conversation with some of the principals in Charlotte. And I know he's been in conversation with Atrium and a few others. And we have talked about a need to have a broader conversation to look at some of the strategies that Charlotte has employed, including potentially us creating a housing trust fund. So we're needing to have these conversations. And I think really it's about picking up on some conversations we had previously. Especially now that we've gotten approval to pursue the housing plan, right? It makes sense now for us to start to resume conversations, because financing is a piece of the conversation around the housing plan. So now it makes sense to resume some of those conversations. But I know the mayor has had some engagement with Charlotte around how they've done things.
And Marla, I think part of the mayor's conversation with Charlotte about that has been somewhat instigated with Tom Williams too, who's one of the previous members of this coalition. So that's something that he's been working on, I understand, over the last month or two kind of stuff. So there is interest in that, in what Charlotte is doing. So I'm glad Paula raised that.
Definitely. And, Tom and I had worked a few meetings and so forth with the hospital, Wake Forest, before Atrium came to the table. Well, we were actually working with them in Novant just before COVID hit. So that kind of put the brakes on that, because we were talking with them both around employer assisted housing, as well as some other opportunities for the facilities to invest in housing generally. So COVID just threw a little curveball at us, and we had not been able to resume those conversations. But again, I think now is a great time, since we've got some momentum that we'll see soon with Housing NOLA.
Okay. All right, thanks. I just had to make that comment about the choice neighborhoods and the perception on council.
Yeah, thank you. And I think, Paul, you were saying something as well. I think, or maybe you said it and I just lost it.
Did you say Paul or Paula?
Paul.
I don't remember.
Okay. And maybe you did and I didn't remember, but I knew you were trying to talk because you were on mute. We're like, no, you're talking and we can't hear you. Okay. Maybe it'll come back to us. And I just wanted to make you all aware that we now have a senior project supervisor in code enforcement, because that position had been open a while due to a retirement the end of last year. So now Brian Cheney is with us in that role. And then we had an internal promotion to the housing inspector supervisor role. And so our code enforcement officer, Daryl Green, was promoted into that supervisor role. One other person, and I'll make sure that she visits with us going forward, is, and I had put her name as well as Doug's in our agenda back in May to let you know they were coming. And so Tanya Skillman is here. She and Doug both started on June 27th. So Tanya is our housing development manager. So she'll be running point on the RFPs that we'll be issuing to do development and things of that nature. So just to let you know, she has arrived, and she came here from Missouri. So she also relocated here to take the position. So Derwin, I don't know now, because you're back now, if you want to talk any more about the COC assessment report, I can, flick through the slide presentation if anybody would like to see it on the screen, or if you're okay with the slides that were presented attached to your agenda. But I did want to say, again, the assessment's complete. We have a lot of growth opportunities that were identified in the report. Along with the report, there is also an action plan that they being Homebase, the consultant, put together for the COC to look at as well. One of the items in that action plan I will mention is how the community intake center is managed and operates. So that will probably be one of the first action items that staff will look to see how we can get that deep dive into the CIC, because that's where everything begins, with someone who needs services. So while someone may be waiting for a housing placement, there's still supportive services that could and should be provided while they're waiting. So how do we make sure the CIC fully integrates the needs and actually tackles some of those things while a housing placement is pending? So, and that's just a small part of it, but that plays a critical role in people's success to housing stability, is how
Marla,
they enter.
Yeah, Marla, I was just going to actually say, maybe there is, and maybe we can have this as an item for us in our next meeting. as we wait for the full report, but even maybe just an introduction to the CLC for the AHG, because I know what you mean by the CIC. I know what you mean by some of those terms, but just the others may not exactly kind of know what it means and how it functions. And so in the report, maybe may not understand exactly, all the moving pieces of that. I don't know. Would that be helpful for other members to kind
of? Yeah. No, and Derwin, I'm with you. I've spent the last 6 years involved with the COC over in Greensboro, and I'm amazed at how different the language is between COCs. So, I think it would be helpful.
So what I'll do, because I am not the resident expert on the COC, I will, however, invite Sharika Floyd, who is our COC manager, to come in and share a few words. The report itself, I should probably be able to get that to you all next week. They sent the final late yesterday after our debrief. So Sharika is to take, and Melon and I one final look. And if it's good, then we'll be ready to actually disseminate it and post it on our website. So I would say that you could probably have it by mid next week. Now, I will tell you the final report is about 60 pages long, but it's really good information. And then I expect the action plan will follow about a week after that, because we still need to debrief on the action plan. So those should be in your hands in the next couple of weeks, both of them.
And the CLC has this as well? They have
They will. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
They will.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right now we were just working with the consultant to get everything finalized. We had a few questions on some things that they had, and we walked through those yesterday afternoon. And so, we will be getting this out writ large to the Commission on Ending Homelessness and the rest of the COC. And we'll get it in your hands, and we look to post it on our website. So we want everybody to have access to it.
Well, a quick question, just for some context, was this prompted in any way by HUD getting involved? I mean, and I say that based on experience we had in Guilford County. HUD was pretty actively involved in pushing for some reform and some, basically you better do this or we're going to intervene. So
thankfully, no.
Good.
We didn't have any HUD impetus. We as staff had major concerns.
Yeah.
And
okay, good. Okay.
And we were just having challenges,
Yeah.
And you'll even see sometimes with some of the council actions every few months, we're having to recapture and reallocate dollars. And, we get some of these crisis calls directly into our office, and we're not a direct service provider, right? And so we were just experiencing a number of challenges in the system, and just said, okay, we just need to stop and ask ourselves, where are we and how can we strengthen the network and enhance service provision? So we think HUD will be proud if we start to make some of the changes that are recommended from the assessment. But we thought, this is it's just the time is now to make those changes. And one of the interesting things, this report and action plan will also be made available to Housing NOLA, because, if you recall back months ago when we started on this path, we said, they had to be integrated because the issue with homelessness is housing, right? And so we could no longer afford to have homelessness in a silo apart from housing. So we'll have to make sure that elements of the plan and the recommendations are reflected in the overarching housing plan that we end up with. The biggest piece, other than just the need for units in general, the biggest need is permanent supportive housing. We have a lot of chronically disabled individuals who need supportive services, and wraparound services. And we've got to do a better job of helping them first find housing, but then making sure they have those supports to have stability and stay in that housing. So they've got to work together. And so that'll be the other, I think, great thing now about all of this kind of coming to the fore at the same time, because this will be another resource for Housing NOLA and the community.
I'm glad Derwin suggested doing it next month and spending some time on it, because the continuums of care are complicated vehicles, if you would. And I know the one here in Forsyth County, you know, at one time when I was still at the trust, there were like 35 to 40 agencies that were involved in the COC. And I mean, it was hard to kind of get them all coalesced around, you know, issues that were important and priorities. And Andrea Kurtz did what she could to help, you know, guide it, but it was a moving target all the time kind of thing. So I've lost track of it kind of thing now, but it does need some revamping, if you would, here in Forsyth County.
Well, stay tuned. Stay tuned. But I'll make sure we add Sharika to the agenda for next month too. I'll make a note.
And Marla, to your point about homelessness being connected to housing, I have to also say that it's not just connected to homelessness, but it's connected to education, to health and wellness, and to other social determinants of health. So we have to always connect those dots to housing.
Absolutely. Oh, we lost Derwin for a minute.
Yep,
Okay,
he's
there we
dropped
go.
off.
Okay, I just put him back in. Okay, well, all right, Derwin, back to you on the agenda.
Yep, I think we're wrapping up. I was just getting ready. My other device died on when I was getting ready to say. So I was just on the piece. I was just gonna say, for me, in reading the preliminary report and listening on that, you know, at least for me, the preliminary piece of there was nothing surprising in what for someone who has been involved and engaged in the space. There was nothing surprising in terms of the recommendations and some of the insights that they were bringing forth. I think, and I'll say, it's one of those things where sometimes it's better to have someone else say it than
Yep.
And maybe they'll believe that the other folks who say it than other folks kind of closer to the work being able to say the same things. Yeah. So look forward to the action part of that too. So
yes, definitely. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah. So with that, we look forward to our in-person meeting next month on the 23rd. We'll get, I guess, a sense of kind of where we'll be. Are we looking the Union Station again, or we'll get something to us in advance of that?
I think I'm going to see if we can get the Public Works Conference Room in City Hall on the 3rd floor there. Yeah, probably there, and we'll make sure people get, you know, little parking stickers and so forth, so you don't have to worry about the cost for parking.
Same time as today?
Yes. 10 o'clock on the 23rd. So if we're unable to get that location, you know, I'll definitely send out a separate email with a new location. But otherwise, I'll also put the location in the updated meeting invite for next month as well. Okay. Cool. All righty then. And I'll see if we can kind of get these notes out to you earlier, because I want to make sure too that out of some of the things that we talked about that we needed to do, I want to make sure that we captured everything so that we'll be able to fully respond or address certain items that were listed here today in time for the next meeting. So we'll work on trying to get those out to you within the next week.
Great.
All
right.
All right.
With that, appreciate everybody. Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
You all too.
All righty.